Thank you so much for joining in and being part of the Tea with B community. Like I was mentioning, last time I was supposed to talk about grief, but somehow the divine consciousness had other plans, and ended up speaking about guilt and a couple of other things. So I mostly, as you would know, those of you who know and watch my videos and lives, that I do go with the flow. I look at, I do have a preparation in mind, but I essentially just go with the flow of what happens in that moment. And today I wanted to talk about grief, like I was mentioning earlier, because we as human beings, irrespective of what culture we are part of or where we are from, we do not address grief, and we do not somewhere acknowledge or respect grief as an emotion, and we look at it as if it is just one of the other things like some of the other emotions, but specifically grief and depression. The moment it is a negative grief, the more we would want to shy away from it. And so I wanted to talk about my experience with grief, and being an empath and somebody who is also a clairvoyant and clairsentient. I have been feeling, and I'm able to sense many of these emotions, not just negative emotions, even positive emotions, very keenly and very deeply. And the moment I enter a room, one can feel that what's happening in the room. And some of you might have felt that and maybe not paid attention to it, so you wouldn't know whether you are clairsentient or clairvoyant, or any of the other clairs. And so my when I did experience deep grief, it was a loss of a loved one. And I wanted to also say that when we're talking about grief today, it is not necessarily the loss of a loved one. Grief can come in different forms, but for me it was, I think, multiple things. It has been, I think the first experience, if I were to talk about, was when a very close sibling of mine had, and this was somebody I always used to look up to, and somebody who I was extremely close to, moved out of the house, and what some parents would have experienced as an empty nest, right? So when children grow up and they move out of the house, and they to study or to work in a different city, they experience something called an empty nest. So for me it was something like that. And of course, at that time, those times, we did not have so much of network or so much of communication variety that we could go on the internet, or we could call every day, it's like that. So it was a very different experience. So once the person went away, it was like, really, you don't know when you would see that person again. So I think my first sense of grief was really that. And then of course it was the loss of a loved one. And also, in terms of some of the other, I think, slightly milder versions, but all of us do feel, when we have worked really hard, and you do not, it's not about disappointment, but it is really what happens with the change, and when it does not happen the right way, right? And so many of those things, and it's not necessarily that I was in the center of it, but either managing it or being involved in it. So grief, first of all, I think, let's define what grief is. Grief could be the loss of a loved one, that most of the times we think of. It could also be the loss of a job, especially now, and nowadays, when there's been a lot of turmoil that is happening. It could be the love, or it could be the love, or sorry, I'm wondering why the word love is coming when I want to mention loss. So I think there's something there, and I'll talk about it as well. So the loss of a beloved pet, it could be the loss of a friendship, It could be the loss of, or a divorce that somebody is going through, or a separation that somebody is going through. And even if one is not married, people in other countries, it could be a loss of a relationship or a partnership. It could also be a major loss in business. So these, it could be different varieties of loss that we might feel. And so how do we identify between grief and usual loss? So the distinction with grief is that it is that loss is felt extremely deeply. One is, it is an emotional response. It is not a response of that there was a monetary loss, or there was a loss of time, or there was a loss of something else. Of course some of it might be involved, but majorly it is the loss of a loved one, the loss of the emotional loss that one feels, right? And so if we were to look at it a little, look at why is it so hard to cope with grief, or why do we not know many, because many a times, when I have spoken to clients, or when I have been talking to different people, a lot of times people come to me feeling that they are depressed, and we do realize later on that that depression is actually stemming from either how one felt the loss of a parent when they were pretty young as a child, or when the parents got divorced, because for a child even that is a very deep, it is a loss for them, and they might be grieving. It could be, and many a times it is, the depression or the physical symptom that comes up, it is many a time related to a sense of deep loss or deep grief that has not been processed. And ever since the last 3-4 years, when I have looked at it deeply, I have really encouraged a lot of people, even people in my friend circle or people otherwise, to definitely work on this grief. It is important to work on this grief. One other type of grief that just came to my mind could also be loss of trust. Sometimes, especially nowadays, many people have experienced it, because of the kind of lives that we're living, because of the kind of stress that we're living. Many a time we do have our set of network or a guru that we might be involved with, and when we face a major issue, or we get to know some negative things about this person, it almost feels as if it is a loss for us, right? So that is also the loss of trust between people, and especially somebody you look up to, especially somebody who you trusted deeply and respected. That is also a major loss. So that also, somebody might feel a grief like feeling, or might feel like grieving when such an incident has happened in their life. And so why does it happen that we probably don't even recognize that it is grief? We do not even recognize that there's something that we need to do about it. So let's go back and look at, if I were to ask you the question, do you know how to ride a bicycle? Perhaps yes, some of you might be riding a bicycle, or you would have ridden a bicycle, and or do you know how to walk? Right, we do know how to walk, everybody knows. Do you know how to write? Right, okay. So do you know how to respond to questions that somebody asks, right? By speaking, that's very natural. So all of these three are actually learned behavior. Whether it was how to write, we were taught to write, when we were small children, our parents used to help us, teach us how to write, and we were in fact also told what is a good handwriting and what is a bad handwriting, and we were also told how to hold the pencil, whether a pencil is better or a pen, and which kind of pen, and there was this whole detailing about just writing. And then also when after class 4 or 5, when you start writing with a pen, what kind of pen do you write with? Should you write with the ink pen so that your handwriting stays good, right? Similarly, when you learned to walk, you may not remember it, but when you were teaching your children, or when you would have seen somebody in your house, your sibling, if you have a younger sibling, they were taught how to walk. So of course it was a lot of experimentation for the toddler or the infant to try and see, how do you walk. But the child or the parent would hold the finger, right, would either hold the hand or make the toddler or the infant hold the finger and make them make a motion of walking, right, and do different kinds of, whether it's jumping or whatever. So there were different stages before the child started to learn to walk. And when the child tumbled, it was self discovery, but a lot of times it was protection from the parents. Hi Vinny, thank you so much for joining in. So what also happened was that the toddler was also protected and taught that, okay, if there's an obstacle, you need to stop. You can't just fall on the bicycle and hurt yourself. I mean, sometimes if it's maybe a pillow, it's fine, but you can't keep falling and hurting yourself because you don't know which part of your body you might physically hurt, right? And so we were taught simple things of even how to walk, simple things of even how to hold a pen, how to write. We were taught. And if I were to ask you the question, how many of you were taught to grieve? How many of us were taught that if we face loss, what do we need to do? If we face a loss of a friendship, or if we feel somebody has, there's been there has been mistrust, what do we do about it? Right? I'm not talking about coping mechanisms. Of course, we'll come to that. At times, there might be some practical tips that somebody would have given. But I'm talking about, are we taught some of these simple things? If, for example, a teacher says certain things, right, about the child, are we taught how to cope with that? Or should we just always say that no, the teacher is always right, so it doesn't matter what the teacher is saying, but we should maybe just keep quiet and take it, right? So, but there is a coping mechanism. There needs to be an emotion way of understanding what is that emotion, how do we deal with it. None of us, at least most of the people that I spoke to, and I myself, I don't believe that I was taught. So so simple things, when you're growing up and a child, usually if you hurt yourself or you lose a toy, or you had a pet cat, or let's say you had a pet parrot, if the parrot or the bird flies away, then usually the parents say that no, it's okay, no, don't worry, don't get disturbed, theek ho jayega. And so the parent is essentially trying to reassure that things will be fine, things will be normal. But what is normalcy? The child may not know that, right? And the child will and so essentially it is a way, whatever the actions of the parents are, it is essentially a way to make sure that calm down, keep quiet. And I'm not saying, because the parents knew otherwise. The parents were trying to do the best. They also wanted quieter time, so it is absolutely understandable. But it was the response of the reaction of the parent is to shut the child down, to tell. And if the child continues to cry, then the parent would probably say, oh, we'll get you another one, we'll get you a new toy, or don't worry, we'll wo to waise bhi, it was already old, wo waise bhi purana tha, and we'll go to the shop and we'll buy this, or we'll go to the shop and I'll buy you ice cream. So those are the coping mechanisms that we are taught, that if something bad happens, then we would get a prize for it, or we would get something for it. Now that does not happen every time. When there is a loss of a job, or there's a loss of a loved one, it's not that it is replaced by somebody else, or we get a job immediately, right? If there is a major loss of trust between business partners, it doesn't happen that you immediately will know and you will get a new business partner who is perfect for you. That doesn't happen. But that is what we are told as young people and youngsters and children. So that is what becomes our coping mechanism, or that is what happens to us when we are thinking what will happen when we face such a loss. And then what starts happening is that we start unconsciously we might expect certain things. When they don't happen, then we are surprised that, this should not happen. The world should treat me better. I should get better things. Because so it, at times, especially with women, what happens, it becomes internal. Oh, I'm so sad. Oh, this is such a problem. Oh, this is what is happening. So it becomes very internal, and it becomes even more victim kind of mentality, right? Or sometimes it could go to a bully mentality. So for example, a woman will usually get into the victim mode, whereas a man or a male energy will get into a bully mode. Bully mode doesn't is not necessarily very overt bully, but they will get more aggressive at work. They will make sure that they would want to get as much out of things, out of people, it might come out as anger when things are not going that way, right? So that becomes the immediate reaction, and it's very different for men and it's very different for women. Also, that is again something we do not get to know. We are not made aware of how to deal with this. Now, I want to quote one study. So there was a study that was done on how the loss of a loved one or an infant, in this case, what is it really connected to physical problems? Because I want to talk about that as well. I don't want to try and make it too long alive, because there'll be too many things that I'll have to cover. But if we were to look at how does this, when we do not look at acknowledging grief, when we do not work on grief, what happens? So one study showed that 249 people who lost an infant or a child reported a total of 404 acute illnesses, right? Which is probably more than one illness per person, or more than symptoms of more than one illness per person. And during the first year of death, this is just the first year of death, the most frequent of these were, of course, colds and flu and headaches. So frequent colds, if you frequently keep falling ill, you have frequent coughing and flu, or cold, headaches, anxiety attack, panic attacks, infections, depression. And also many people do nowadays, of course, because our food habits are not as much and there is other external stress, a lot of people might experience chest pains and also experience high blood pressure, right? So this is one study. I could have quoted some number of other studies, but I wanted to let you know that what is the extent of how grief can affect the physical body. Now, when we let's quickly talk about the different stages of grief. And the stages of grief are much like change, right? So those of you who work in the corporate world or who have worked in the corporate world earlier, most of the people are resistant to change, right? And even though we know we are resistant to change, it still happens, right? And then we suddenly become aware and we're like, okay, it's just change and it is okay. I will work around it and I can manage it, right? So it's very similar to change in many ways. So I'm going to quote Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, because she's done a lot of work in terms of a lot of research with people who have faced grief, and especially in terms of death, and who have probably and where she's worked a lot with terminally ill patients. And so she described 5 stages of grief, and that has become very popular now. And the 5 stages, and I'm going to break that up even more, because personally I think it's a little bit more than that. So she talks about that there's first denial, right? Obviously immediately there's denial, then there is anger, then there is bargaining, then there is depression, and then there is coping or acceptance. Now, when we talk about denial, so when there is a loss of a loved one that happens, or there's you lose a job, or you lose the trust of somebody, or you lose a personal dream or a relationship, the first thing is we are in denial that no, it's not happening, or this is just temporary, or this person just wants to break off, or just for now, and it's not happened. I think it's only in terms of when it is actual death that it is so stark that you are in denial, but physically, obviously, you can't be denial because the person is not physically with you, right? The first step in the grieving process, what happens is that we feel denial, or we are in denial of the actual situation. The other thing that happens is this next stage is anger. There is a lot of anger and resentment of why did it happen. Sometimes it could also be, why did it happen to me, or this always happens to me, why, and we might what we might do is we might start being angry with other people, and it may being short tempered, so to speak. So something goes wrong at the house, we might shout at the servants, we might shout at colleagues, we might shout at our friends, or our our husbands, wives, children, or parents. So it is that you just snap very quickly, right? So that is, and so anger can be deflected onto somebody else also. Then there is bargaining. Then there is, you feel that oh, this is aisa kyun hua, why did this happen, this was not the right time. So we're trying to explain, give an explanation to it somehow, right? And then when we start realizing that it is real, it is, things are not changing or not going back to what it was, so we start getting into the acceptance mode, or we start first getting into the depression mode first, actually, sorry. So depression is when we start feeling that grief, or we get into the mourning stage, when we accept, when we are able to talk about it. Usually in the first 2 or 3 stages we don't talk about it because we've not accepted it. So where we start talking about that this is bothering me, when we get into the depression stage. When somebody asks us, then we are able to respond saying, yes, this is what I'm feeling. People may need a little bit of cajoling, little bit of persistence, and then they'll actually reveal what is happening with them. And finally is acceptance. So the acceptance happens when you start, and I think there are 2 stages of acceptance. The first being where you start getting back to normalcy, even though in the first 2-3 stages you might be sometimes doing a bit of work, but most of the times, either one might make mistakes, or you don't really want to. And later on, what happens when in the acceptance stage is when you actually start becoming a little more productive at home or at work or with other people in friendships, right? Because we are always speaking to people, we are interacting with people. And beyond that, when we have, usually it happens that either during the course of time or when we have actually sought professional help, then is the time when there is acceptance about it. Okay, and that acceptance happens it takes time for that to happen, and we need coping mechanisms for that to really take place. So it was not brief, but yes, so there are these different stages of grief, very similar to change, because grief is change, right? It happens when there is, the status quo changes permanently, it does not go back, and there is a new dimension, there is a new paradigm that comes up, pretty much like what's happening right now. The other thing that I have mentioned that some of the issues, that the psychosomatic problems that people do face because of this, and some of the other symptoms that might come up is regular fever, right? And if there's a lot of resentment and there is a lot of anger, you're not dealing with it, it will start showing up either in different parts of your body. It might show up as a lower back ache, it might show up as PCOD, it might show up as stomach aches, heartache or heartburn, right, or ulcers. It might also show up, of course, sleep is again something that very common, that happens naturally. The first thing that is hit is our sleep, that we are unable to sleep, or we wake up feeling not rested, right? We might have a lot of lucid dreams that we don't remember later on. So all of that is how it affects the body and not just the mind, right? And why does this happen? Because also understand that our immune system comes down. So our immune system really takes a hit when we do not deal with grief, and we do not deal with such strong emotions of grief and such strong life circumstances. So what do we do? What can we do? So I would so there are, of course, there are multiple ways to do it, and no one way fits all. Some, at the beginning, you might, simple talking to people and being around people might help. Some people would rather be alone because that's their coping mechanism. So if you know, first of all, if you know somebody who is grieving, the most important thing is just to be around them, and not send a WhatsApp message, not send a SMS, but being, if you can be physically around them, do that. A phone call or a WhatsApp video call is better than just sending a text, because a person can mask their feelings and hide their feelings in a text. But when you are physically talking to the person, or at least seeing the person face to face, you will be able to understand what that person needs. So the person, just being around them, and if physically you can be around them, just spend doing lunch or dinner, and whatever there is, giving them that support is a big thing. It's a big plus. They will remember that support throughout their lives. The other thing that one, and if you personally are feeling that grief, if you are undergoing that grief, then I would really urge you to talk to somebody, speak to somebody, and it may not be somebody close to you. And many a times, people who are grieving will be surprised that they would rather talk to somebody who is, so to speak, a stranger or an acquaintance, because we do not want to be judged. We do not want to be told that be strong. We don't want to be told that it is okay, because it definitely isn't. So if you feel like talking to somebody who is not your best friend, who is not your parent, who is not your spouse, it is okay, because at that moment you need more than a judgment or somebody trying to help you to cope with it. Maybe you just need to listen, and maybe you are just in the initial stages of your coping mechanisms. So yes, I think that's the initial stage. I would really recommend seeking professional help. It is extremely important that you seek professional help. It could be a psychotherapist, it could be a counselor, it could be a psychologist, it could be a psychiatrist, depending on what your level of comfort is, depending on what your level of grief is. Please seek professional help. It is very important for you. You can also engage a life coach for a couple of weeks. It could be for a couple of months as well. So that you are able, even if you're just talking to them about what's happening to you, right? If you are into meditation, great. Even then, you would need that support. Okay, I had been meditating, and I was I have had a very strong spiritual practice for many years, but despite that, I needed support. I realized I needed support. Okay, so the other things that you can do is you can definitely work with energy healers, so that you are purging all the negative energy, because there'll be a lot of memories, a lot of negative thoughts, sometimes things where you wanted to complain about somebody, and then you feel, oh my, and there is this guilt that the person has passed away, and I am cribbing about the person, or I'm only remembering negative things about the person. But that is your way to cope. It is not okay to feel guilty, and in the sense that there is nothing to feel guilty about. Okay, so energy healing, definitely you can definitely work with them, so that your energies are, whatever is getting drained, you are converting, you're getting more positive energy, and you're releasing your negative symptoms, your negative emotions, your negative energy, right? Exercise, the big thing. But sometimes even for exercising you need support, right? So if you will see all the themes, all of these are actually, you need support. Okay, and most of the time professional support is the most important thing, because the moment we say that we are paying for a service, we ourselves take it seriously. Okay, so exercising is a big thing. It doesn't matter what exercise you do, how many times in a week you do, it is okay, because right now it's a coping mechanism. You're not doing it for something else, right? I would also urge you that if you could pray and meditate, join a support group. There are support groups, there are women's circles. I run a women's circle. You can join that. You can join any other support groups that you might know of. You can ask around. Nowadays there are a lot of support groups available as well. The other thing is, go out for change, go and meet other people, and go and watch movies, go and do things outside of the house, because when we're inside the house, it will remind us of the same negative emotions that we have been feeling, right? So those are some of the mechanics that I felt we you know about, one, why is grief so important to understand and to acknowledge. And it is not a simple mechanism, and it is not a simple emotion. It is very, it is a deep emotion, and that has to be dealt with. And some of the tips that I have given, I hope they would be helpful for you. If you do have any questions, you know where to reach out to me. And those of you who would want to join T4B community, there are Friday lives that I do, so please do join. Please ask your friends to join in. And thank you so much for today. If you have questions, I will come back again on live and I can address them in the next live. So thank you so much, and have a safe and blessed weekend.